I know who stole the paintings from the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum. Information about the Isabella Stewart Gardner theft and the thieves. How do I know this? In 1990, I was a sophomore at UMass Boston, still living at home in Milton, Massachusetts. I was 19 and had gone out drinking using the driver's license of one of my sister's friends. At 2 a.m., after the bars and clubs had closed, I started talking with a young man outside of Avenue C, a now closed club in Boston. I was waiting for my sister and some friends to finish getting pizza. We started talking about movies. He was talking about an old movie, Six Bridges to Cross, about a bank robbery in Boston. We talked about how you would stage a robbery, not seriously, but in a hypothetical way. He said his friend from Everett had stolen Boston police uniforms from a movie set. He said they were hanging in his closet. I said you could disguise yourself as police officers and rob a museum. He said there was too much security at the MFA, and then I said the Gardner Museum in the Fenway. He said his father used to work there as a security guard. He might have said his friend. He said he knew the exact words he would say. This is a robbery. Jokingly, I asked if he and his friend, were from Charleston, because I wouldn't be talking like that if they were. They seemed too serious about the idea of a robbery. They said they were not from Charleston. To me, we could have been talking about robbing the gold from Fort Knox. It was just a crazy idea. I did not think they would actually do it. He talked about how he had been in the foster system and how he wanted his former boss to be his dad and that he had offered to adopt him when he was younger. My sister and her friends wanted to leave, so we exchanged numbers and parted ways. He didn't call. Over that weekend, the Gardner Museum was robbed, just as he had said. I either read about it in the Globe or heard about it on the kitchen radio. I told my mother about meeting those guys and what they had said. She said we should call the FBI, which we did. They told us to go to the museum and tell the FBI team there that was running the investigation. They said to write everything down and bring it in. My mom typed up my statement, including the telephone number and the name he had given me. My sister corroborated my story. She had heard us talking. We brought it to the museum. My mom brought it inside. I waited in the car with my sister. My mother was gone a long time. I was getting worried when she finally came back. She said the museum staff and the FBI were all in a state of panic and didn't know what to do. They had asked her to type some things up for them and asked her to come back the next day. She said that the museum was going to have a press conference and we could watch. We left the car and went outside. The press conference was held outside. The director of the museum, Anne Hawley, spoke, and so did the FBI. We watched the video later that day, and you could see my sister in it clearly and me in the back. The next day, the 19th, for some reason, my mother wanted my sister and I to get our hair cut before we went in. In retrospect, I think it was so we looked more respectable and not like teenage troublemakers. We went to Supercuts and then to the museum. We went in and had to wait for the FBI. My sister got tired of waiting and went to sit in the car. Finally, after about an hour, we spoke to them. They said they would figure out who the phone number belonged to. To understand this story, you have to understand my mother, Rosanna Hart, née Flaherty. She was one of the smartest people I have ever met. She skipped a grade in elementary school and graduated high school at 16. While she loved her family and her father, he was an alcoholic who did not sober up until the last years of his life by a stroke. She did not go to college and entered the workforce, working at Henry's and then at Procter & Gamble as a secretary. She left when she married my dad and then had 3 kids. In the 1980s, she went back to work briefly for the IRS, but it was too stressful for her. She worked as a temporary employee sometimes. A work colleague at one of her jobs was fired and committed suicide. My mom was deeply saddened by this and carried guilt about that for the rest of her life. I think that is why she felt so strongly that she needed to help Anne Hawley. My mother was the oldest child. She had 2 younger brothers and for many years took care of her elderly parents and an aunt who lived nearby. At this time, my wheelchair-bound grandmother was living with us. On March 19, 1990, the security guards from the museum who had been tied up were still there and being questioned by the FBI. I was shocked they were still there. They said they had not been taken to the hospital or been permitted to leave. I got one a Band-Aid because he was still bleeding from the duct tape being torn off. The FBI asked me to write my statement in my own handwriting, and they would talk to me again. As I was writing, they were talking and did not know whether the thieves had taken anything else. Anne Hawley and my mother were talking, and they decided that my mother would go through the museum and check off on the guide whether the items were still there. She found the large Rembrandt self-portrait painting leaning against the wall in what she called the Spanish room. I believe it was the Spanish chapel close to the stairs going down. She brought it back to the Dutch room. She and Anne went to look at it, and they confirmed it was the Rembrandt they had thought the thieves had taken. The FBI brought me to another room without my mother, and I wrote down my statement again for a second time. I waited for hours and finally went back into the other room and gave it to one of the FBI agents. He said I would have to speak to another FBI agent, Agent John Connolly. He told me to wait at a chair on the side of the room. I asked where my mother was, and they said she had gone home. It was night by this time. I was shocked and frightened that she had left without me. More time passed. Finally, Agent Connolly said I could leave. I said, "But you haven't taken my statement yet. Should I come back tomorrow?" "Who are you? What do you have to tell me? Sit down." He was sitting with a Boston Globe reporter, Steve Kirkjian. I took a seat in front of the desk, and I explained the whole story again. He did not take notes. He started saying I was in league with the thieves. I said no, I had only casually talked to them this one time. He kept on talking like I had stolen the paintings. He said to forget about college, I was going to jail. He said I was on drugs and to look at my eyes. I was overtired but completely sober unless they drugged the water they had given me. He started making sexual remarks, really nasty things that as a sheltered honor roll student from Milton I had never heard before. I told him no, I wasn't going to do any of those things. I reminded him that he was with the FBI. He said, I could put you in the trunk of my car and you would never be seen again. I said, you can't do that. You're the police and the reporter from the Boston Globe is right here. I can put him in there too. You'll both be gone. I was the only woman in the room with about 4 men much older than me. 2 of them were FBI. One was the boyfriend of Anne Hawley, and the 4th, Steve Kirkjian, was the Boston Globe reporter. I was extremely frightened. I told them I came from a big Irish family, my uncle was rich, and a lot of people would come looking for me. He gave me the phone. Here, call your father. You'll be dead before he gets here. I didn't call my father. I was scared that they would really kill me before he got there. I called Peter Connolly, a former classmate, also from Milton, that I had gone to school with since elementary school. I asked to speak with his dad, who I believe was also named Peter. I hoped he was related to this John Connolly. He said distantly related. I told him what was happening. He said he didn't know this John Connolly, but he had heard that he had a nasty reputation, that he liked to push people around. He said that he knew where I was and to put John Connolly on the phone. I believe he told him he was going down the wrong path with this and to let me go. Anne Hawley came back and I left with her and her boyfriend. John Connolly made more nasty remarks as we were leaving. We went to Anne Hawley's place and I called my mother. The boyfriend asked me if we were going to have sex. Anne Hawley apologized, told him to go to sleep, and said that John Connolly had been making those sort of remarks and threats to her as well. My mom came and picked me up. She talked a lot with Anne. She said she had left with my sister and driven home Richard Abath, one of the security guards who had been tied up. My sister had talked with him on the drive. He was very disappointed about missing the Grateful Dead show. She said that one of my friends, David Barber, might have tickets to that night's show since he was also a Deadhead. Richard Abath ended up driving to that night's show with David Barber's sister and of remarks and threats to her as well. My mom came and picked me up. She talked a lot with Anne. She said she had left with my sister and driven home. Richard Abath, one of the security guards who had been She said she had left with my sister and driven home Richard Abath, one of the security guards who had been tied up. My sister had talked with him on the drive. He was very disappointed about missing the Grateful Dead show. She said that one of my brother's friends, David Barber, might have tickets to that night's show since he was also a Deadhead. Richard Abath ended up driving to that night's show with David Barber's sister and her friends. We went home and I told my parents what had happened. I was worried about the Globe reporter Steve Kirkjian. My father and I went to the Boston police station nearest the museum and reported what was happening to the police there. The police were a little confused what we were saying that an FBI agent was threatening to kill people, but they did say that they would send a police car around to the museum. We went to the museum and waited outside to see. We waited about 20 minutes. No police came. They might have arrived later. I got worried that they were really going to kill the reporter. My dad went inside the museum and got him while I waited at the car. My dad, Jack Hart, was 6'4" and worked construction. He had been a lumberjack and in the Army Corps of Engineers, but he was a very gentle person who very rarely raised his voice. Waiting in the dark parking lot, I was scared they would hurt him. But my father and Steve Kirkjian both came out in a few minutes. Steve Kirkjian said he was not sure they were going to kill him, but that he was very uncomfortable and that the FBI should not have said what they did. He said he was grateful for my dad coming in. My dad had told the FBI he was there to drive the Globe reporter home. Steve said he was supposed to write about Jesuit priests getting killed in El Salvador, but that he would write up this instead. My father asked him not to. He said that the murder of the Jesuit priests was more important and that he didn't want me to be associated with the types of sexual remarks the FBI agent had made. I agreed that the murder of the Jesuit priests was more important. I left with my dad and Steve drove himself home. He did write about the murdered priests. He made his deadline. It was in the Globe the next morning. The next going to the museum again, and that she and I would be working there. I told her I did not want to go and that those agents were psychopaths that were going to kill me. It was a week of school break, so I did not have my work, study, job, or school. My mother said that my cousin Mary Hayes was also going to work there, and that with her and other women around, the agents would not be making those types of remarks or trying to steal things. She said Anne Hawley had said that she thought the agents were trying to steal the painting my mom had found. She said that they didn't trust me. My sister Maria refused to go. She said she had work. My mom brought me to get my hair cut again from shoulder length to more of a bob length. She said that they wouldn't even connect me to the person they had been interrogating the night before. She had me dressed more conservatively as well, like I was going to an interview. I was very scared walking in, but they really did not seem to notice me. My mother and I talked a lot with Anne Hawley. She was distraught over the museum being closed. She said she was thinking of killing herself. She did not think with the museum being closed for the third day, she would have enough money to make payroll. She thought by the terms of the will, the museum would have to close. We decided to figure out what the will actually said. There wasn't a copy at the museum, or at least not one they could easily find. I suggested calling the state archives that were over by UMass Boston. I had visited them for a history course. We called and said they did not have those records, but they told us the archives that did. We called there and told them it was related to the robbery, and they said they would look for the will. They called back a little while later and said they had found it. I went over by the tea and picked it up for Anne Hawley. They gave us the original in a red folder and envelope. They said we would have to return it as soon as we were done with it. I brought it back and they photocopied it. It said that Boston College would get the contents of the museum, but Anne and I changed it to Harvard University. We thought Harvard had enough museums of its own to run and would not challenge the will, but that Boston College was part of the Roman Catholic Church, which was at that point selling everything, even churches. I thought changing a historical record was wrong, but I was convinced by Anne and my mother that it would save the museum. We did this even though we are faithful Catholics and my cousin Mary Hayes had graduated from Boston College. Anne was relieved that the will could be interpreted that they could change other areas of the museum. She talked about building an addition. She said they couldn't add to the collection. My mother and I had gone to the Renoir exhibit at the MFA, and we talked about space for temporary exhibits. She didn't know what to do about the missing paintings, because if she removed the frame, she would be changing the museum. I told her about the University of Arizona's stolen artwork where they had exhibited the empty frame. She said she might call that museum to see how they had handled it. We talked about how my high school art teacher had said that the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum was the only art museum in the world founded and named after a woman. She was very afraid that the press would blame her for the theft. She was the first director not to live at the museum. She thought that if she had been living at the museum, the robbery would not have occurred. The museum was also uninsured for theft. I told her to always call the museum by its full name when she spoke, because then the reporters would have less words to use to talk bad about her. She laughed, but I wasn't joking. I helped gather paint chips off the floor from where they had carved the painting for frames. A Boston Globe photographer took our photo while this happened. Anne wanted me to wear a white coat to seem more like a museum curator. We put the paint chips in a cardboard box. Anne stood there holding the box. But what shall I do with them? Just save them. Maybe art historians will come and cry over them. I was with Anne Hawley, and she was talking with one of the FBI agents. I don't think he connected me as the woman they had terrified the prior night. They were talking about what they would tell the press. I mentioned that in some investigations, the police keep some information back so they could weed out people who were just seeking publicity from the actual criminals. The agent agreed that that was true, but this one didn't have many details that they could keep secret. Someone suggested adding a small painting or drawing to the list of paintings stolen. Anne said that they would have to remove a painting from the collection, and that would mean removing it from the public eye. She said she didn't want to do that, and they had taken an etching or drawing from the locked display table. They would have broken the glass or the lock. She didn't want anything more at the museum damaged. Just then, someone who had overheard us talking about a small etching came in with one from the gift shop and said they had found it. It was a copy of a print of Rembrandt's that was at the Rijksmuseum, just a replica. They decided to make a copy of the print and say that it had been stolen. I made a copy on the photocopier and smudged it with ink so it would look differently. I made up the provenance from different entries in the guidebook. The FBI agent came up with the title, Rembrandt with Three Mustaches. I translated into French. Boston Globe reporter Steve Kirkjian was there, but said that he would not write about it now in turn for an exclusive when the paintings were recovered. They thought the more publicity, the more chance the paintings would be found. They decided to say that the stolen landscape was not a Rembrandt and to give it the name of a more obscure painter. They thought it would make it harder to sell and keep it closer to Boston. I chose one who was alive in 1916 so we could say that it was all a mistake, and they transposed the date. Gustav Flinck has taken on a new 17th century life of his own, however, thanks to forgers and to criminals hacking Wikipedia and the Rijksmuseum website. They said that they could use some fake art for undercover work. I knew that we could take paper from the end papers of old books and paint on it. They gave me old paper. I think it was cut out of a 19th century art book. I made the Degas drawings. We had books from the museum to look at as reference. I used black chalk so they could not carbon date them. I made 2 drawings. They were not very good. I thought they would only use the better one, but they used both of them. The title was meant to lower expectations that it was art made for some minor gathering, but even that was unusual. Normally musical programs were just... The other woman there, I think she was a curator, made the sketch of the jockey in 3 poses. I smudged some white paint on the jockey to make him stand out more. In retrospect, possibly it was naturally that she was pretending to have drawn. Anne wanted to have another press conference to tell exactly what had been stolen. I think she thought more items would go missing if she did not. The FBI agents did not want to have it yet. My mom told her she could call one herself. They had me call the newsrooms around Boston and say that the museum was having a press conference. My work-study job was for the alumni office at UMass Boston, so I was used to calling people up, mostly to ask them to come to functions or donate money. We started getting ready for the conference. They made photocopied pictures of the paintings and told me to give them to the person outside. I didn't even realize that it was my cousin Mary Hayes who had to say, "It's me, Karen, it's Mary." We taped them to a table lying on its side so the reporters could see. I went and made the Rembrandt etching copy much smaller so that people could understand it was a tiny, unimportant etching. My cousin Mary Hayes was going to be speaking first. She just had to read what they had told her to read and answer a few questions. They said they would call her an acting curator, Karen Haas. In the newspapers, the security guards had been changed so they would not be harassed, so it did not seem so deceptive. They gave her a fake history so no one would guess that she was in her 20s. She was concerned that people would know she hadn't worked there all those years. However, it was a fairly big organization, so they might not remember a part-time worker with a random schedule. The second press conference went off smoothly. No one recognized that Karen Haas, acting curator with 14 years' experience, was really Mary Hayes, newly graduated law student. I returned the will to the archives. When I got back to the museum, I spoke to someone who was with one of the FBI agents. It was a young man I had met at the very beginning of the story. He said the FBI agent was his uncle's friend, and they were going to take more items from the museum. They were going to take them out the side entrance by the Chinese lodge, and his uncle was going to bring a car around to the street. He had to explain that the loggia was the entrance to the Chinese gallery. I went and told my mom that the thieves were still there and that we needed to leave. She said that he was not one of the thieves, that was impossible. Going back to the room, I encountered the corrupt FBI agent John Connolly again. He said that you can take a souvenir from the museum. It's all going to be boxed up and sold anyways. We're all taking them. He brought me over to the flag and gave me a screwdriver and told me to remove the flag from its case. I said, "You're going to France, right? That's a French flag." And then he walked out of the room. I didn't think of it at the time, but this might have been him trying to entrap me. Others have speculated that the flag was one of Connolly's corrupt mob associates. I started to take the screws out of the case, but it was difficult. I put down the screwdriver and just decided to leave. This was all wrong. I felt bad about leaving my mother and cousin there, but they were adults and my mom had left me there the day before. I walked out of the door, passing by the security desk, which still had the empty frame on it, got on the T, and went home. There was so much happening in the world. The genocide happening in Gaza, the war in the Ukraine, the dungeon at Guantanamo where America keeps prisoners of war without trial. How can I spend so much time writing about a robbery that happened 35 years ago? At age 19, it was one of the first times I encountered real corruption in the hands of people who were supposed to protect us. Specifically, corrupt FBI agent John Connolly threatened to kill me. He said I was going to end up dead in the trunk of his car with the Boston Globe reporter Steve Kirkjian, who was listening to him. My father had also gone into work briefly at the museum as a security guard that same week. John Connolly had told him to make a homeless man leave the grass outside the museum. My father had gotten him to move further away, but not to leave the grounds. John Connolly got angry and went over to the homeless man who was sitting peacefully on the ground and struck him with his fist. There was no shouting or scuffle. He just hit him out of the blue. This was shocking to my father. Boston police didn't act like this. He left the job because he did not like working with them. The museum offered my mother a permanent job, but they wanted her to use a fake name, and it just seemed so shady that my father and I persuaded her not to take it. She stopped working there also. My parents and I complained to the FBI about John Connolly's actions. My mother went to a hearing about it, but I was studying in France. I regret that I did not push it further at the time. His corruption might have been exposed earlier. When I recently requested the files about this from the FBI, I received my FBI file with 9 deleted pages and numerous redactions. The FBI is still covering for the convicted murderer and former FBI agent John Connolly. I feel like I can bring some truth to this investigation, shine some light on what happened to you. I feel like if I can bring some truth to this investigation, shine some light on what happened here, we may be able to shift our justice system and our news organizations back on track. Some have questioned my assertion that Anne Hawley thought that because of the theft, the museum would be discontinued and all the artworks sold at auction. The terms of Isabella's will are widely known. It is because of this will that the museum retains its timeless quality. You can all look at a digital copy of the will obtained from the Massachusetts Supreme Judicial Court archives. I was the first to publish that on Medium. Several months went by after the theft, and I called the FBI again to see if they had done anything about what I had told them. They told us nothing. Everyone else seemed to forget about the whole thing. The following year, when I was doing my taxes, I asked my mother how I should put the museum on my taxes. I hadn't gotten a W-2 from them. I thought my mother had gotten paid for the hours I worked there. She said not to put it on my taxes and not to bring it up. When I was in France, I got a call from the FBI asking why I had not gone to the discipline hearing for John Connolly, the FBI agent later convicted of murder. I said I was studying in France. My mother had gone and told them what had occurred. The person seemed to expect me to have taken a plane back to Boston for the hearing and returned to France. That probably would have cost $500. To me, that was so prohibitively expensive that it was incomprehensible that they would expect me to do that for a single day. The agent told me that my mother saying it was hearsay and that it would not be counted. I do regret I did not go to the hearing. Perhaps exposing his corruption would have changed the trajectory of John Connolly's life and prevented him from murdering people. I do regret that I did not go to the hearing. Perhaps exposing his corruption would have changed the trajectory of John Connolly's life and prevented him from murdering people. My parents at the time believed that nothing would happen to him, that at best he would get a slap on the wrist, and at worst they would try to blame me. My cousin, Paula Flaherty, accompanied my mother to the hearing just to support her because she was so nervous, and I wonder if the FBI targeted Paula because of that. She later lost her job and had a series of misfortunes. This is very odd, but while I was in France, I also got a call from someone who had said he was the guy from the theft. He said he was in a car and had just stolen paintings from a museum in Europe, but that the police were coming to get them. He said he was calling from a phone in a suitcase in the car, which was before people commonly had portable phones. He said he had called my home in Milton first, and my mother had given him my number. I asked him why he was calling me, and he said my advice had gotten him out of trouble the last time he was in it. I told him to leave the paintings in the car and get on a train out of the city. I said to buy a magazine and snacks for the train ride, and to say that you had come with a friend to the museum, but it had closed. Your friend drove back, but you were going to stay and see the town, but there really isn't much to see in the town, and so you're taking the train back. The car was a rental in his uncle's name, but the uncle should say you never picked it up. I think this possibly was the thief again, or it was just the FBI trying to mess with me. It seems to be this theft that was in the Netherlands. I mentioned it to the French family I was staying with, Monsieur and Madame Debunking, but they thought it was some sort of weird prank call from someone who had heard on the news about the stolen paintings. Monsieur Debunking said not to bother les flics with it. My last attempt to tell the authorities had not gone well, so I thought it was best to think about it as a prank phone call. My mom did say that she had given my number in France to one of my friends who had called. I graduated college, UMass Boston, and then went into the Peace Corps. I was sent to Mauritania, but came back after several months. My mother got breast cancer and my sister had a baby. I moved out with my friend Anne-Marie Ramon. My mother died of cancer and my family and I were completely devastated. About a year later, one night when Anne-Marie and I were at Access on Lansdowne Street, I met Jim again. I thought he was the person I had met before, the one from the theft, but he denied it convincingly. That would be Archie James Corellis. He always went by Jim. I met Jim again, Archie James Corellis. I thought he was the person I had met before, the one from the theft, but he denied convincingly. That would be the first time he gaslit me. We started dating, and he brought me to Greek Easter at his aunt and uncle's house. His aunt is Stella Bloom. Her husband was the artist Hyman Bloom, now deceased. I met his parents, Stacy and Teresa Corellis, his brother Michael Corellis, and his sister Kelly Corellis Matarazzo. I am not 100% sure if they are biologically related to Jim. His uncle, Danny McGuire, fosters kids, so I think possibly they could have met him as one of Danny's foster children and adopted him when he was older. One day, when we were over his parents' home in Everett on Glendale Street, I noticed a painting on the wall of his attic room. It was Chez Tortoni by Edward Monet. I knew it was one of the paintings stolen from the Gardner Museum, but Jim said it was an old print of the painting that his parents had gotten tired of and put in the attic. They also had the painting Christ in the Storm on the Sea of Galilee, but I did not see it until years later. It is still hanging on the wall of his father's senior living apartment in Medford, Mass. I believe it is the original, not a print. His father, Stacy Corellis, had been a part-time guard at the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum in the 1980s while he was working full-time as a chef at Jimmy's Harborside restaurant. Jim said that he had been in the museum as a child and had even gone into the basement where the security guards were tied up with his father. Jim joked that it would be funny if he had actually stolen the paintings from the museum, but it seemed so much more logical that it would be a print of the artwork. After all, I had prints of artwork in museums. His family did have a print of the Rijksmuseum Rembrandt etching on the wall along the stairway. I had looked at it closely and was sure it was a print. And who would hang a stolen painting openly on the wall? I have since learned that this is common among art thieves who are stealing to enjoy the art. Later, on the anniversary of the theft, when I saw again the sketches of the thieves, I thought it looked like Jim and his brother, Michael, but I only kidded him about him. A few weeks later, when I was back in his room, the painting was gone. He said he had put it in the other part of the attic. I think possibly he had given it to George Reisfelder, who was said to have possessed it in the Barnacle Brothers documentary, This is a Robbery. Watching that and seeing that he, too, had brazenly put the painting on the wall of his apartment reminded me of Jim. Eventually, Jim moved into my apartment in Quincy, and then we moved together to Austin. I changed jobs and worked at Harvard Business School and then Harvard Medical School. I was also taking college-level science classes and trying to get into veterinary school. Even more strange things happened, but I will lose the focus of this article if I start telling you about them. Some of these include the cover-up of the murder of Kristen Smart, a Californian woman, and Jim and his uncle Vincent McGuire's involvement in the Raelian cult. I will tell you that I think Jim drugged me and hypnotized me. I think he's also drugged people he's worked with, and possibly his current wife, Laura Gordon Corellis. He's a very charming person. I guarantee if you met him, you would instinctively like him more than me, but he's not a good person. I tried to leave him several times, both before our marriage and after. Each time he convinced me to come back. He made me feel like I should be grateful for him for taking when he was the one creating these bizarre situations. Jim worked on his Uncle Hyman's website, https://hymanbloom.com. He was frequently going between Fenway and New Hampshire, getting things for it. When he went to India for his job at News Edge, I believe he used some of his aunt and uncle's contacts in India to sell some of the paintings from the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum theft. We got married and moved to Medford, Mass., close to his sister, Kelly Corellis Matarazzo's home. He had contacted the Globe and had them put a #1 in the stocks page. He had another of his friends bring one of the paintings, I believe it was the Rembrandt landscape, to Maine. They had an artist cover up the obelisk and were trying to sell it as another Rembrandt landscape. At times we spoke about the theft and his uncle Vincent McGuire's involvement in it, but then he would say I had dreamed it or was making it up. He and my own relatives gaslit me in this manner. During this time, we had 2 kids, and I started working at Mystic Valley Regional Charter School. We separated and later divorced. I got my master's in education from Lesley University and started working as a teacher. I have called up the FBI, Anthony Amori, and contacted the trustees of the museum to try to resolve this. I have asked numerous news agencies to investigate, but unfortunately the days of the investigative reporter are a thing of the past. The painting Christ Calming the Storm on the Sea of Galilee by Rembrandt is literally on the wall of a senior living apartment in Medford, Massachusetts. When I've talked to these authorities, the only person they wish to investigate is Anthony Matarazzo, Kelly's husband, who to my knowledge was not part of it because of some of his Italian-American relatives had ties to organized crime. I've asked the governor to appoint a special auditor to look into the FBI investigation. I can only think they are not investigating because of the corruption that pervades Massachusetts. I am praying now that with President Trump in office and Kash Patel in charge of the FBI, we might finally see some progress on this.